The cold came in through the gap under the stable door. The kind of cold that had teeth, that found the spaces between your fingers and stayed there. Maren had stopped feeling her hands an hour ago. She was still moving them, still packing the saddlebag with the things she had spent 3 days quietly stealing. A jar of fever medicine from the healer's cabinet. A wax-sealed vial of the immune tonic the pack physician saved for ranking wolves, half a loaf of dense travel bread, and a water skin she had filled twice because the girl's lips had been cracked white when Maren last checked on her. The girl's name was Issa. She was 4 years old. She was not Maren's. Issa was the daughter of Alpha Calder Voss, the lord of Erengate Pack, and his dead mate, Elora, who had been the kindest woman Maren had ever known and who had died of a fever the pack physician had decided was not worth treating because Elara had shown signs of the wasting illness, and wasting wolves were poor investments of medical resources. That was the exact phrase, poor investments. Maren had been the one mopping the clinic floor when she heard it. She had kept her face still and her hands moving and her mouth shut because that was how you survived in Erengate. You made yourself small, you made yourself useful, you made yourself invisible. She had been doing that for 7 years. Maren was 26. She had been brought to Erengate at 19 as a bonded servant, not a slave. They didn't use that word. But the contract her dying father had signed in exchange for the pack's financial support of her younger brother's education had another name that meant the same thing. She worked in the stables. She groomed horses, mucked stalls, repaired tack, and occasionally, when the head groomsman was drinking, she did his job too and received no acknowledgement for it. She had no wolf. Her shift had never come. The pack called her what packs always called, girls like her. Dull, dry, the kind of animal that knew how to work but not how to run. She had learned to believe them. That was the worst part. 7 years of being called nothing. And somewhere around year 4, she had stopped arguing with it even in her own head. She checked the saddlebag one more time. The medicine was there. The tonic was there. The bread was there. Issa had a fever that had been climbing for 2 days. The pack physician had been called. He had looked at the child, noted her mother's history, and said the same thing he had said about Elara. Poor investment. Calder Voss had not been present for this assessment. Calder Voss was in the Northern Territories, dealing with a border dispute that his second, a man named Dre, who had flat eyes and the particular cruelty of someone who has never been told no, had probably engineered to get him out of the way. Maren had seen Dre look at Issa 3 times since Elora's death. The way he looked at her was the way a man looks at a problem he is waiting to resolve itself. She had started planning the night of the physician's visit. She had no money. She had no wolf. She had no allies she trusted enough to involve. What she had was 7 years of memorizing Erengate's routines, who patrolled where, when the eastern gate was left on single guard, which guard was prone to falling asleep after midnight. She had the kind of knowledge that came from being invisible. People did not watch their mouths around someone they considered furniture. She knew about Dusk Hollow. Dusk Hollow Pack lay 3 territories east, past the marshland corridor that the border maps marked as impassable, and everyone agreed to avoid. Everyone who had not, for 7 years, watched the water flow through that marshland from the stable ridge at dawn and thought in the idle way of someone who expected nothing. A person could walk that, if they knew where the solid ground was. Maren knew where the solid ground was. She had mapped it in her memory 1 stride at a time over 7 years of early mornings. Dusk Hollow had a healer, a real one, a wolf named Breck who was spoken of even in Erengate's medical circles with a particular combination of envy and dismissal that good professionals reserve for someone who is genuinely better than them. Breck had saved pups the other healers had written off. She had treated the untreatable. She worked for Dusk Hollow's Alpha King, a man whose name Maren had only ever heard spoken in careful voices, as if it were a thing that could hear itself being discussed. Evan Dusk, the Iron Quiet. 34 years old, unmated, and supposedly the most dangerous alpha on the eastern coast. Maren did not care about dangerous. She cared about Breck and the medicine and the 4-year-old girl burning up 2 stables away. She checked on Issa one last time. The child was in a cot in the corner of the grain room. Maren had moved her there 3 days ago, claiming the nursery was too drafty, which it was. But the real reason was that the grain room had a door Maren could lock from the outside. Isa was small for her age, dark-haired like her mother, with fever-bright cheeks and a breathing that had gone shallow in the last hour. Her eyes were closed. One hand was fisted around the edge of her blanket. Maren adjusted the blanket, touched the back of her hand to Isa's forehead. The heat was frightening. "I know," she said quietly. "I know. We're going." She could not take a horse. A horse would be noticed. She could not take the main road. She took Isa, wrapped against her chest in a sling made from her own stable coat, and she walked into the marshland in the dark. The ground was treacherous. It looked solid and it wasn't. And twice in the first mile, Maren went into a knee before she found the underlying stone shelf she'd mapped. The third time she went into a hip. The cold water hit her like a wall, and Isa woke up and made a thin, reedy sound against her neck. "I have you," Maren said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were shaking. "I have you. Hold on." She held the child up out of the water. She found her footing. She kept moving. The marshland took 4 hours. She came out the other side, grey with mud and hyperventilating from cold. Her left boot gone somewhere in the 3rd mile. Her sock soaked through and then frozen and then just numb. Isa was still breathing. Maren checked her pulse with 2 fingers against the tiny wrist and felt it. Light, fast, hummingbird quick, but there. "Good girl," she whispered, and she could not have said if she meant Isa or herself. Dusk Hollow territory smelled different. She registered it before she registered the tree line. Something in the air, resin and rain-washed stone, and underneath that a current she had no name for. Something old, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck lift in a way that was not fear. She walked another 2 miles on a foot. She was increasingly certain she'd broken on the marsh stone. Dawn was breaking grey and thin by the time she saw the border outpost. Stone walls. A watchfire burning in an iron cradle. A carved sigil above the door. A wolf, mid-stride, head down, ears back. Going somewhere with total certainty. She made it to the door. She knocked. The sound was soft. Her knuckles had almost no feeling left. The wolf who answered was a woman, which Maren had not expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and forearms that could have cracked stone, wearing Dusk Hollow's grey patrol uniform with the sleeves pushed up despite the cold. She looked at Maren the way a good sentry looks at an unexpected thing. Fast, assessing, dangerous, and then something shifted. Her eyes went to the sling. "She's sick," Maren said. Her voice came out like something dragged over gravel. "She's 4 years old. She's been running fever for 2 days, and your healer, Breck, I know she can help. I've seen what she's done. Please. I'll go back. I'll submit to whatever process you have, whatever your Alpha King requires, but please just get inside," the woman said. Her name, Maren learned in the next few minutes, was Yale. She had 2 other wolves with her, a young man named Pell who moved immediately to the fire to build it higher without being asked, and an older wolf with a grey-streaked beard who identified himself only as Soren and who held out his arms for Isa with the practiced ease of someone who had held sick children before. "Let me take her," Soren said, "just to check." Maren did not let go. She was not ready to let go. She was not ready to let go. Soren met her eyes. His were steady, unhurried. "I won't move from this spot," he said. "Watch my feet." She let him take Isa. He checked the child's breathing, her color, pressed gentle fingers against the glands below her jaw. His face did the thing. Faces do when the news is not good, but not yet catastrophic. A careful stillness that tried to give nothing away. "Pell," he said. "Radio the main house. Tell them we need Breck at the eastern post. It's not even full dawn. I know what time it is. Tell them." Pell moved. Maren sat in the chair Yale put behind her because her legs had decided the crisis portion of the evening was over and they were done. Pell handed her a tin cup of something hot. She drank it. It was tea, strong and slightly burnt, and the best thing she had ever tasted. "What's your name?" Jarl asked. "Maren." "I'm nobody. I work, I worked in the stables. Elongate pack. You came through the marsh. It wasn't a question. Maren looked down at herself. The mud told the story clearly enough. Yes, in the dark. On foot, carrying the child. She was dying. Maren said it simply because it was simple. There was no one else. Yale looked at her for a long moment with an expression Maren could not identify. Not pity, not suspicion. Something more considered than either. The child, Yale said. She's not yours. No. Her father is called DeVos. She's his heir. His second was letting her die. The room went very still. Soren looked up from Issa's side. Yale's posture changed. Not alarm? Exactly. But a realignment. The way a person stands differently when the stakes shift. Calder Voss's daughter, Soren said quietly. His only child. Her mother is dead. His second arranged for him to be away, and the physician said. Maren's voice caught. She pressed her lips together until she had control of it again. He said she was a poor investment. The silence that followed was a particular kind, the kind that came before decision. The radio crackled. Pell turned. Main house responding. Breck is on her way. 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Maren looked at Issa's face in the firelight. The fever flush had gone to something darker, a bruised undertone under her cheekbones that Maren recognized and did not want to recognize. She doesn't have 40 minutes, she said. 20, Soren said to the room. Tell Breck 20. Another crackle. Another voice, lower, coming through the static like something carved out of bedrock. What's the situation? Not a question. Maren noticed that. Evan Dusk did not ask questions when he could state a need. Yale's hand tightened around the radio receiver. Alpha. We have a child. Elongate Alpha's heir. Fever, 2 days. Looks like. Breck will know better. But it looks like. I heard, the voice said. I'm closer. 8 minutes. Yale set down the receiver. She looked at Maren, and the look was professional and honest. The Alpha King is coming himself. Maren had been cold for hours. This was a different kind of cold. She thought of everything she had heard about Evan Dusk. The stories that reached Elongate were sparse and filtered through 2 layers of political distortion. But the core of them was consistent. A man who ruled the way a drawn blade ruled, without flourish, without warning, already committed to the direction he was going. He had taken the dusk-colored leadership from his father, not by killing him, but by simply being so obviously necessary that the elder Dusk had stepped aside. Some called it a mercy. Others called it the most terrifying kind of power because it required no violence to announce itself. Maren looked at Issa. Whatever was about to happen, she had made her decision miles back in a marsh with cold water at her hip. The door opened. The fire didn't dim, nothing so theatrical. But the room reorganized itself around him. The way a room deorganized itself around him. The way a room does when the gravitational center shifts. He was not. Maren registered distantly what she'd assembled from the stories. The stories suggested something large and carved, some monument to authority. He was large, yes. Tall, with the kind of build that came from actual use and not performance. A jaw that looked like it had an opinion about everything and kept it to itself. A scar across his left hand, old and thick. Dark eyes that moved through the room in a single pass. Yale, Soren, Pell, the child, Maren, and stopped. He stopped. In the middle of the room, equidistant from all of them, Evan Dusk simply stopped moving. Like a clock, mid-tick. His nostrils moved. His eyes, which had been the careful eyes of an alpha assessing a situation, did something she could not name. Something came into them that had nothing to do with the room or the mission or the sick child in Soren's arms. Something private, startled as if he had walked into a room expecting it to be empty and found it full of light. He looked at her. Just her. Maren, he said. She froze. How do you know my name? You told Ye. The radio. Right. She exhaled. He crossed the room in a way that seemed unhurried and covered the distance too quickly. He stopped 2 feet from her and looked at her the way she had never been looked at. Not like a problem, not like a tool, not like a category. Like a person. Like someone who had been looked for. "You came through the marsh," he said. "Yes. In the dark. The child is sick. I didn't have options." She met his eyes because she was too tired to look away and too stubborn to be intimidated into submission, and she was aware that this was perhaps not the correct response to an alpha king, but she could not locate the part of herself that would have modulated it. "She still is. Where is your healer?" Something moved through his expression, not irritation. Something that might have been the opposite, a flicker of something she couldn't identify, gone before she could name it. He turned to Soren. "Let me see her." Soren transferred Isa to him without question. The child stirred in the change of arms and made a small sound, and Evan Dusk, the Iron Quiet, the most feared alpha on the eastern coast, looked down at this 4-year-old girl with an expression that had no performance in it at all. Just assessment. Just concern. "She's burning," he said. "I know," Merrin said. "That's why I walked through a marsh at night." He looked up, the dark eyes again. Something steady in them, something that was not yet a question but was preparing to become one. "Breck," he said. 12 minutes. I'll carry her." He looked at Merrin. "Can you walk?" "I've been walking." He made a sound that might have been something. "Your foot." "What about it?" "You've been favoring it since I came in." "Broken?" She looked down. She had not been aware she was favoring it. "I'll manage." He handed Isa back to Soren with careful precision. Then he crossed to Morin and crouched, and before she understood what was happening, he had one hand below her knee and was pressing carefully around her ankle through her remaining sock. She hissed through her teeth. "Yes," he said. "Broken." He stood. "Yale, get the sled from the east store. We move in 2 minutes." He did not ask if Marin wanted to be helped. He also did not simply pick her up. He stood beside her and offered his arm and waited, and the waiting was so deliberate, so specifically chosen that she understood it was not passivity. He was giving her the decision. She took his arm. The contact sent something through her that she had no reference for, a warmth that started at her hand and traveled somewhere deeper, and in the hollow place inside her chest, the place she had learned to call nothing, the empty room where her wolf should have lived, something shifted. Not woke. Not yet. Just moved, like a creature that had been perfectly still for a very long time, registering sound for the first time. She said nothing about it. She walked. Breck arrived as they reached the main house, a long, low structure built into a hillside that Marin would have found beautiful under other circumstances. The healer was smaller than Marin expected. Compact, quick-moving, with close-cropped gray hair, and the eyes of someone who has seen everything and learned to triage. She took Isa from Evan without greeting anyone, simply pulled the child into her assessment with the focused efficiency of a professional who understood that time was not decorative. "Infection," Rex said, 3 minutes in. "Not viral. Bacterial, in the blood. She's been fighting it for at least 5 days. Whoever caught this late should have their license reviewed." She was already working, already drawing from the case she'd brought, her hands moving with the quiet precision of absolute competence. "It's treatable. I want to be clear about that first. It is treatable. She will not die tonight." Marin sat down on the floor. She had not planned to. Her legs just decided. She sat down on the stone floor of Breck's workroom with her back against the wall and her broken foot stretched out in front of her. And she put her face in her hands, and she did not cry. She had not cried in years. She had learned not to. Crying at a wrong gate produce either contempt or the particular weaponized sympathy of someone looking for weakness. She had dried herself out. But her breath shook. A long, ragged exhale that took everything with it that she had been holding for 4 days. She felt him sit down beside her. Not close, a deliberate distance, close enough to be present, far enough to be chosen. His shoulder was not touching hers, just there, solid, like a wall she could lean against if she decided to. She'll be all right, he said. I know. Breck said. I know you know. I said it because you needed to hear it more than once. She lifted her face from her hands. He was looking at her. In the warm light of the workroom, his face was different than it had been at the outpost, still controlled, still contained, but the edges of it were different. Less armor, more man. You don't know what I need, she said. Not yet, he said. She did not have an answer for that. Breck fixed her foot before dawn. She was businesslike about it, and not especially gentle, and exactly as gentle as she needed to be, which was more than Marin had experienced in years of Irongate's medical care. You've got old breaks in this foot, Breck said, palpating with quick fingers. Not this one. Older, 2, maybe 3 years. I dropped a feed crate, Marin said. It healed on its own. Breck looked at her over the tops of her glasses with an expression that contained an entire conversation that neither of them spoke aloud. Right, Breck said. Well, this one won't heal on its own. Hold still. Marin held still. In the morning, Evan came to the room where they had settled her. A small room, warm, with a window that showed the hillside turning amber in the early light. He had slept or not slept, or done whatever Alpha Kings did with the hours before dawn. He looked the same, like a man carrying weight so habitual he had stopped noticing it. Dre has sent a message, he said. She'd expected this. What did it say? That you are a bonded servant of Irongate Pack who has stolen the Alpha's heir and fled across Dusk Hollow's border. That you are a criminal and should be returned immediately along with the child for proper adjudication. He paused. He also suggested you are mentally unstable, a woman without a wolf, prone to delusion. The familiar blade of it, still sharp after all the years. He would say that. What would you say? She looked at him. I would say that the child had a bacterial infection in her blood that had been developing for 5 days, and the pack physician described her as a poor investment, and her father was conveniently absent. And the only adult in that compound who attempted to get her any help was a bonded servant without a wolf who had no leverage and no authority, and did it anyway. She stopped. I would say, look at the child. The child tells the story. He was quiet for a moment. I told them no, he said. She blinked. No to what? To everything Dre requested. The child stays. You stay. If Irongate wishes to dispute this, Calder Voss can come himself. His voice was level, precise. I find I am very interested in speaking with Calder Voss about why his heir was in the hands of someone who considered her a poor investment. He didn't know. That's what I intend to determine. She searched his face for the political calculation. She was not naive. She understood that an Irongate Alpha's heir was a significant piece on any board. She found it. She also found something else. She had spent 7 years reading people through invisibility, noticing what they did when they thought no one of consequence was watching. What she saw on Evan Dusk's face when he looked at the doorway behind which Issa was sleeping was not strategy. It was anger. Clean, specific, and entirely focused. You're not using her for leverage, she said, and it was not quite a question. I am also using her for leverage, he said. Those things can be true at the same time. On the second day, Issa woke up and asked for Marin. Breck delivered this information with the air of someone reporting a clinical finding and absolutely not finding it meaningful. Marin went. Issa's color was better, her eyes were clear and tracking, and she grabbed Marin's hand with the grip of a child who had recently been frightened and was not ready to let go. You came, Issa said. Of course I came, Marin said. I was cold. I know. You're warm now. Issa looked around the room, at the new ceiling, the different walls, the window showing unfamiliar hills. Then she looked back at Marin with the direct, unfrightened eyes of a 4-year-old who has decided that location is less important than presence. Are we staying? Marin did not know how to answer that. She said, for now. Yes. Issa accepted this and went back to sleep holding Marin's hand. Evan found her there an hour later. He stood in the doorway, looked at the picture of them, the sleeping child, The woman with her broken foot propped on a stool, the joined hands. And he stayed there a moment longer than a man who was only making an assessment would have stayed. On the fourth day, Dre arrived. Not Calder. Dre. Marin watched from the upper corridor as he was brought into the main hall, a long stone room with a fireplace at each end and Evan's chair at the center, positioned in the way of a man who had thought carefully about sightlines and decided he liked them all. Dre walked in with the smooth confidence of a man who believed he was managing a situation. He had brought 2 others, a woman Marin recognized as his mate, Cress, whose face she had learned to keep unreadable because Dre watched her expressions for information to use, and an older man from Irongate's council whose name Marin had never been told because she had not been told names. She had been told to mop floors. Evan sat. He listened to Dre speak. Dre was good. He was always good. The kind of person whose lies came already polished, already wearing the correct shoes for the occasion. He spoke of Marin's instability, her attachment to the Alpha's child that had grown inappropriate, his deep concern for little Issa who must be frightened in a strange environment. Evan said nothing for a long time. The silence was specifically terrible, not because it threatened it didn't perform threat, but because it simply waited, and in the waiting it made clear that no amount of smooth speaking was finding purchase. The child, Evan said finally, had a bloodstream infection. Clinical determination by my healer, who I'll note is the same Breck your own pack has sought to consult on 3 separate occasions in the past 8 years. He paused. She had been symptomatic for 5 days. Your pack physician's notes indicate he was called and advised no intervention. Dre's composure flickered. The physician used the phrase poor investment. I would like to understand that phrase, Dre. In the context of a 4-year-old girl, Calder Voss's heir. Cress put her hand on Dre's arm. The servant had no authority to. She had no authority, Evan agreed. She had no wolf, no rank, no leverage, no protection. She walked through the marshland in the dark with a sick child because she was the only person in your compound who attempted to help. He leaned forward slightly. I keep returning to that. The only person who tried. In a compound full of ranked wolves. Why was that? The silence this time was a different kind. Marin, in the corridor, felt something she had not felt in a long time. Something that she had learned to set down because carrying it had been expensive. The solid, quiet certainty that what had happened to her and to Issa was wrong. Not complicated, not a matter of perspective. Wrong. It was strange to hear someone else say it. Evan looked up directly at the lattice screen of the upper corridor, and she understood suddenly that he had known she was there from the moment she arrived, possibly from before. He looked back at Dre. You'll return to Irongate, he said. You'll tell Calder Voss that his daughter is alive and recovering, and that Duskcollar requests his personal presence to discuss guardianship of the child and the circumstances that led to her near death in his absence. You will convey that the bonded servant Marin is under Duskcollar protection and that her contract with Irongate Pack is, as of this morning, formally contested. He stood. You are welcome to dispute this. I would enjoy the conversation. Dre's face had gone through several colors. He settled on controlled. You can't simply, I have, Evan said. Yale will escort you to the border. That evening, Marin found him on the hillside behind the main house, standing in the cold with his hands at his sides and his face turned toward the eastern tree line. He heard her coming, of course he did, but he did not turn until she was beside him. What's happening? She asked. Calder will come, he said. He's already traveling. The message reached him 2 days ago when Dre's original report did. Someone in my network makes sure I receive things before they're intended for me. Something shifted at the edge of his mouth. Not a smile. The shadow of one. He's angry. Not at you. He didn't know about the physician's assessment. Dre had been filtering his information for months. Marin stood with that. His daughter almost died, she said. Yes. He knows. He paused. He asked one question when my envoy reached him. He asked if she was afraid. What did you tell him? I told him the child woke up asking for the woman who carried her through the marsh, and that she's been sleeping holding her hand. Maren looked to the tree line. The wind moved through it with a sound like water. I want to ask you something, Evan said. He still wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the trees, and his voice had changed slightly. Less alpha, more careful. And you can refuse to answer. She waited. Did you know what you were walking into when you came across? I knew your healer could help her. That's not what I asked. She thought about how to answer that honestly. I knew I'd either be treated as a criminal, or I wouldn't. I knew the outcome for Issa if I stayed. The math wasn't difficult. You had no guarantee. I had no guarantee of anything my entire life at Erongate, she said. You learn to act on the most likely outcome, not the guaranteed one. He turned then, full toward her. The evening light caught his face and she saw something on it she had not expected. Something that looked like it was close to pain, or perhaps had recently been pain, and was only now finding another form. I've been looking, he said. She didn't understand. For what? I didn't know, he said. I didn't know for what? I knew I was looking. 34 years and my wolf has been, he stopped. Look for the right word with the carefulness of a man who does not waste them. Restless. Since I can remember, my advisors told me my mate must have died young. They told me to choose a mate, take a companion, stop. Another pause. I refused everyone because there was nothing there, no pull, nothing. Maren's heart was doing something she had no category for. Until tonight, he said. At the outpost. She knew what he was saying. She had felt it too. That shift in the hollow space, that thing moving that had never moved. She had been explaining it away since the outpost, because she had spent 26 years explaining away everything that did not fit the life she was allowed to have. That's not possible, she said. I don't have a wolf. I can't be. I know what I felt, he said. My wolf knows what he felt. Your wolf may be confused. Something crossed his face that might, on a different man, have been a laugh. He has been many things. Confused is not among them. She turned away from him and looked at the tree line and tried to organize her thoughts into something that made sense. An unmated alpha king, a bonded servant with no wolf. A bond that both of them had felt at the same moment in a cold border outpost before they had exchanged 3 words. What does that mean? She said. For someone who doesn't shift. I don't know, he said. Breck may know more. Breck. Maren felt a sudden specific suspicion. She looked at my hands this morning for a long time. Did she? For someone treating a broken foot, she was spending considerable time looking at my wrists. He said nothing. Evan. Let Breck tell you, he said. I'll be there, but let her tell it. Breck told it the next morning in the workroom, with Issa asleep in the adjoining room and Maren sitting across from the healer with her broken foot in its wrap, and Evan standing at the window looking at the hillside the way he looked at everything, as if it might at any moment require a decision from him. Your wrists, Breck said. She lifted Maren's left hand and turned it to the window. The light caught the mark on the inside of her wrist, a mark Maren had always assumed was a birthmark, a small silver-white crescent that sat precisely on the pulse point. How long have you had this? My whole life. My mother had it. Do you know anything about your mother's family? She died when I was 12. She didn't talk about her family much. Breck set her hand down gently and turned to a shelf of books behind her. Old ones, the kind with cloth spines and faded gold letters. She found the one she wanted with the ease of someone who had been waiting for this occasion. She opened it and set it in front of Maren. The page showed an illustration. A wolf, silver-white, enormous, rendered in a style that was several hundred years old and had lost none of its accuracy. Below it, a crest, a crescent moon over an open hand. Beneath the crest, text in a font so old Maren had to lean in to read it. The Ashwalkers, wolves of the threshold. They stand at the border between what is and what could be, between the dying and the living, between the lost and the found. Their wolf does not wake in the ordinary way. It wakes when the need is absolute. Merrin looked up from the page. The Ashwalker line, Breck said, is not extinct. It was suppressed. A bloodline that powerful drew too much attention from the old council. They enforced a series of bondings, not physical, not written. Bloodline bondings, woven into the family line itself. She paused. It's why you never shift it. The bond suppresses the wolf until, by the logic of the magic, and I understand this may be strange to hear, until the wolf's purpose is fulfilled. Her purpose, Evan said from the window. Ashwalker wolves wake for the threshold moments, Breck said quietly. The moments where a life turns, where the dying become living, where the lost are found. She looked at Merrin. You walked through a marshland in the dark to save a child who was not yours. You stood in a border post with a broken foot in front of an alpha king, and your only demand was for someone to heal the child. Merrin sat very still. What happens when the wolf wakes? She said. You shift, once initially, and it's not. Breck chose her words. Comfortable isn't the right term. It's profound. And it's permanent. The suppression breaks and it doesn't restore. I'm 26 years old. I know. I've spent 26 years being told I have nothing inside me. Breck's expression did something careful and precise. People say things like that to control the things they're afraid of. The wolf woke 3 days later. Not in a controlled environment. Not in Breck's workroom with supervision and books, and the healer's steady hands ready. Calder Voss arrived that afternoon. A tall man with Issa's dark hair and the eyes of someone who had spent the last week realizing how many things he had failed to see, and when he came into the room where his daughter was playing with a set of carved wooden figures that Yale had produced from somewhere, and Issa looked up and said Papa in the uncomplicated voice of a child who is certain of welcome, Calder Voss sat down on the floor and held his daughter for a long time without speaking. Merrin stood in the doorway and watched, and the hollow place inside her, the place that had been called empty for 26 years, broke open, not painfully. That was what she would remember later, that it was not painful. It was like a door swinging open that had been sealed so long the frame had warped, and the effort was real, but what came through was light. Her spine curved, her hands changed, her senses expanded outward like a held breath finally released. She could smell the pine on the hillside 3 miles away, could hear Issa's heartbeat, strong and steady and alive, could feel Evan in the next room before she saw him. His presence a warmth she'd been registering for days without a word for it. She was on 4 paws. The doorway was too small. She stepped back from it without thinking, into the corridor, and her paws on the stone made a sound like certainty. She was large. Larger than logic. Larger than a first shift wolf had any right to be. Silver white with a coat that caught the afternoon light from the window at the end of the corridor and held it. Calder Voss looked up from the floor where he held his daughter. He went very still. Issa leaned around her father's arm, looked at the silver wolf in the corridor, and said with the total equanimity of a 4-year-old whose world already contained marshes and border posts and Breck's needle, "That's Merrin." Merrin shifted back. It was natural. It felt like breathing out. One moment wolf, the next moment woman, kneeling on the stone floor of the corridor, and she was shaking, and she was laughing, a sound she barely recognized, rough and unused and entirely involuntary. And Evan was there, his jacket around her shoulders before she had finished processing that he had moved. "Ashwalker," he said quietly, "not for anyone else." "Don't," she said. "I'm not saying it as a bloodline. I'm saying it as what you are. You've been walking the threshold your whole life." He crouched in front of her. His eyes were level with hers, and what was in them was not the careful assessment of an alpha king, but something rawer than that. Relief, she thought, and something that had been waiting a long time to stop waiting. You walked it for Isa. You walked it for everyone in Erungate who got a little quieter and a little safer because you were there and you were watching. She pulled his jacket closer. It smelled like resin and rain-washed stone and something warm underneath. I want to go back, she said. He stilled. Not to stay, she said quickly. I'm not asking to go back to that. I want to go back because there are others there. Other people who are being managed into smallness. And I know all of Erongate's routines. I know all the things the invisible people know. She paused. And I want Dre to look me in the eye when he realizes what he tried to make hollow. He was quiet for a long enough moment that she started to think she had miscalculated something. Together, he said. I was thinking I'd go alone. You can think whatever you like, he said. I'm coming, and you should know. He stopped, and the thing on his face was careful and deliberate. I'm not coming as your alpha. I'm coming because I have spent 34 years not knowing what I was looking for. And I found it in a border post at dawn, covered in marsh mud, demanding my healer before she'd said 3 words to me. His jaw shifted. I don't intend to be far from it again. She looked at him for a long time. You should know, she said finally, that I have never been especially comfortable with being claimed. Good, he said. I'm not claiming you. I'm telling you where I plan to stand. You decide if you want me there. The marsh crossing, going back, was nothing. She ran it in her wolf form in under an hour, Evan beside her, his wolf larger than she'd expected, and darker, a charcoal gray that absorbs the morning light. He matched her pace precisely, not leading. Beside, they arrived in Erongate at dawn. The accounting was not loud. It did not need to be. Evan spoke to Calder Voss's counsel. Calder himself had remained in Duscolo with his daughter, in the room where she slept securely, and what Evan said was specific and evidenced and left no rhetorical room. Dre was removed from his position before midday. Cress went with him because she chose to, and Maren found she could not locate the energy to be cruel about that. Loving the wrong person was not a crime she was in a position to judge. The physician's medical notes were reviewed. 3 other wolves in Erongate had received the same phrase in their records. Poor investment. 2 of them were still alive. Both were brought into care, the bonded servant contracts, 17 of them. Maren had not known there were 17, were reviewed by Duscolo's legal counsel and found to be legally void under provisions that Erongate had been quietly ignoring for 15 years. Maren stood in the main hall of a pack house she had cleaned for 7 years and watched the legal counsel inform 17 people that they were free. She thought she would feel more than she did. What she felt was quiet. The particular quiet of something finished. Evan found her afterward in the stable. Old habit. She had gone to the place she knew best, leaning against the stall of a mare she had been caring for since the horse was 2 years old. He stood at the stable door and did not come in until she looked up. Ready? He said. She ran her hand along the mare's neck one last time. The horse, she said. He looked at the mare. She comes with you. Maren laughed. Again, that unused sound, less unused than it had been 2 weeks ago, finding its shape. All right, she said. Yes, ready. She walked out of the stable into the early light, and her wolf moved in her chest, wide awake, no longer restless. Settled, like something that had been waiting to arrive somewhere and had, at last, arrived. She did not look back at Erongate. There was nothing behind her that she had not already carried for a marshland in the dark and brought safely to the other side.